Okay, it's back at Senate Appropriations. We are talking about, we're talking about FY26 in general, but this testimony is really to give the committee background on the pension system and the pension agreement is what I call it. There's probably a better name. There's the architect.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Don't underfund pensions.
God, that was so appropriate.
You mentioned
Walking
pensions.
in this.
Yeah, if you mention pensions 3 times, Jake gets
And Jane, don't forget about OPEB.
No, don't forget about OPEB, which is a lesson. Don't add a benefit and not having a funding source for it. It catches up with you. But just checking out where everybody is sitting.
A couple of us have moved.
No, you're feeling better, I hope.
It took 3
I'm
weeks to
feeling
get the seating chart.
I'm sure. Well, you have a lot of experience with that table. Anyway, I'm glad pensions are doing well.
Yeah, moving in the right direction.
You're not going to stay for the full report?
No, look, I'm not, let me assure you, I'm not here to monitor the committee work.
Oh.
I told Deb Ingram that I would be interviewed for her. She does something under the Golden Nose
Oh, nice.
for public access TV, which we did fund, remember last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, gave to the Secretary of State. Oh, hi. And you're on pensions too?
I am indeed.
Oh, good.
She's here not to tell us what to do, but if we underfund the pensions,
Yeah.
she'll be back.
I'll channel you all. So, well, good seeing everybody.
Yeah, thanks for the visit.
Yeah, it's nice I could fit it in between.
Yeah, and well timed.
Yeah. So I have to show you the photograph of Antarctica.
Yes, I like it.
Yeah. Well, see ya.
Okay, so that's a great introduction.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, we have a slide deck here just to provide an overview of some of the sort of high tops and historical points on pension funding over the years. And thought it'd be helpful to have this first chart here that just sort of, again, talks about some of the high points of the last couple of decades. The Great Recession was a big hit to the pension funds. They experienced a significant sudden drop during that financial crisis. That was 2008 to 2010 time period. And then this sort of 2010 to 2020 time period, there was sort of a slow, gradual decrease of the funded ratio over that decade. So those two things combined moved the state system from 94% funded down to 66% funded, and moved the teacher system from 81% funded down to 51% funded.
And Treasurer, I also when I hear about the past pension situation, often people talk about underfunding it prior. I think even prior to 2008.
Yeah.
That's not on your chart.
Yeah.
That's also true, right?
There
part
was
of the problem.
a period during the 90s and maybe even early 2000s where there was an intentional underfunding of it. So there's an ADAC, the actuarially determined employer contribution. I think there was a decision that we would contribute less than that amount for some years in time. I just like to start with the Great Recession because it was such a dramatic drop off in the funded ratio.
Right. Makes the chart look better.
Yeah, but there were historic underfunding issues prior to the Great Recession, and I guess that was sort of But the other way to think about the underfunding is this decade from 2010 to 2020. The funded, even though we met the ADAC every year, the funding ratio continued to go down, which, you could talk about the assumptions being, too high or not right or too rosy. So even though we weren't underfunding it from not providing the ADEC, you could think of it as being an underfunding because we didn't put enough money in given a realistic assumed rate of return. it just wasn't an express below the ADEC
Right.
funding.
Okay, that's a good point.
So
We have funded the ADEC since
yeah,
2000 something.
yeah, I want to say since the Great Recession.
Since we've been on the amortization.
Yeah.
Okay.
2020 we point out as a specific moment in time because I think it was an important discussion to have around the assumed rate of return. You know, it went from 7.5 to 7, and that's where we are now. But if you remember that period of time, it created a lot of consternation because it made the unfunded liabilities jump up because we were making the assumption that we were going to earn more on our investment returns over the ensuing decades than we really were going to. And then once we moved that down, it meant that we needed to make it up somewhere else. So that was partly what I think drove some of the conversation in 2021 and 2022 was that assumed rate of return drove up the ADEC. The ADEC jumped a lot that year, and the unfunded liabilities jumped a lot as well. So in 2021, Act 75 created the pension design, benefits design and funding task force. And on top of that, there were also some governance reforms that were put into place as well. Specifically, the Vermont Pension Committee became the Vermont Pension Commission, its own independent commission. But the pension benefits design funding task force worked that year, came back with recommendations in 2022. Act 114, which we'll talk about today, you know, that's what was implemented to create there was one time about $200 million one-time money, ongoing additional funds from the state in terms of the ADEC plus payment, increased member contributions from everybody that were scaled in over time, benefit changes mostly around the COLA to make the COLA not kick in until 24 months rather than 12 months. And then there was pre-funding of OPEB benefits, which was something that really drove down the unfunded liabilities and increased the savings that we'll talk about in a minute. So here we are in 2025. We have seen 4 years ever since we made that change with the assumed rate of return and also the pension reforms fully implemented now. We have seen 4 years of improved funded ratios, which we have a slide on. But if we go to the next slide, you'll just see that post Great Recession period, that 2020 experience study that led to the assumed rate of return going from 7.5 to 7. That impact from the Great Recession, that slow decline over that decade. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see the funding ratio for pensions, VSTRs and VSRs 4 years in a row where they're ticking up. VSTRs, the teachers was close to 50% funded in 2020, now over 60%. So that's great to see that trajectory. VSRs was at mid 60s, now at 71%. So great to see that trajectory as well, but they just were a little bit higher and their increase a little bit slower because a little bit more money that went into VSTRs right out of the gate. But both of these systems on track to be fully paid off by 2038. That's sort of the trajectory. Prior to the pension reforms, there was concern about the back years, and you could, still obviously concerns about the back years.
What do you mean by the back?
So like 2036, 2030, I'm sorry, yeah, 2036, 2037, 2038, those sort of last years of the payment cycle that they would recalibrate for what the unfunded pension liability was, so that they might jump up to really high budgetary amounts in those last years. And, there's always risk that the market's not going to perform as you want it to. And as you get closer to 2038, if the market has a bad year at the wrong time, it could have an outsized impact on the budgetary pressure and what the state has to come up with. And there are ways to address that. But generally, where we stand now, looking forward to 2038, I think it's more realistic after the reforms that we're going to get there than before the reforms. There were years where we were concerned that from a budgetary standpoint, those amounts were going to go way up in those out years, and it was going to be hard for the state to meet that obligation. Now, when we did our most recent analysis, from a budgetary standpoint and inflationary standpoint, it's actually pretty flat and actually starts to come down in those out years. So the aggregate amount will grow in terms of what we need to contribute to the pension fund, but as a percentage of the budget, it'll be a smaller amount, which, again, makes it more realistic that we're going to get there to 2038. And we have a slide here on the OPEB side, and I was joking with Senator Kitchell because, we refer to both OPEB and pensions, or at least I do, as pensions, but, the OPEB piece of it was a really critical piece and something that should be called out specifically. This stands for other post-employment benefits. For retirees, it's primarily health care. Health insurance has become a more and more important benefit for our retirees across the board. So historically, the teacher and state employees do not have their OPEB benefits pre-funded. So we were paying them as we went. We didn't have the ability to earn significant investment returns to help pay for these dollars. So it wasn't all taxpayer dollars. There was an analysis that showed generally across pension systems, like 60+% of dollars that are paid out are actually generated from investment returns and not from the employee or the employer. So it's really important to put that money to work and get those investment returns, earning money for the state and for those employees. And now we have that system in place. So if you go to the next slide, you'll just see it's really, really early days. We're talking about 71% funded for the teachers or for the state and over 60% funded for the teachers. These funds are in the 11 and 15% range, but they will grow rapidly over time. And we have started to see already the benefit of these investments, which we'll talk about in a later slide. But this is a favorable increase as well, and these will continue to go up as we proceed. And I should mention that the pre-funding of OPEB, right now, there are no benefits being paid out of these funds, so they're growing and being added to.
We're still doing co-pay?
Yeah, but we're pre-funding the OPEB at the same time.
Okay. At what point would we take out of the fund to?
Yeah, it's a good question.
We have to wait till it feels healthy enough.
Say again.
Tim Duggan, from the Treasurer's Office. The ADEC that is contributed every year, that amount goes to both cover the benefits payments for that year and a substantial additional amount that seeds the fund for future years. So,
are you waiting till you get to a certain funding ratio before you take any out of the fund, or you would wait till you get all the way to 100%?
No, we do. So the money goes into the fund when it's appropriated from the legislature, and then so we do pull the money from the fund.
So you're using earnings plus the appropriation.
Right. It's just that we're putting well north of what we need for the premium amounts, whereas in the past we just paid the premium amounts.
And it's at some point in the future, when you're close to 100% funded, it would be you're not making up any ground on top of what you're paying out. Yeah. And that, for the OPEB, that trajectory is further out, that's 2048.
But is the goal, like in 38, it's not that the funds would provide 100% of we'd still have an appropriation to make.
Right, but we wouldn't have the, we'd have the normal cost, but not the unfunded liability cost. So in 2038, there would be hundreds of millions of dollars that would no longer need to be paid into the system. And then similarly, by 2048, hundreds of millions of dollars that would need to be paid into the system.
Yeah.
So on the next slide, we have Act 114 savings. So we just did an analysis in our office at the end of last year into this year that sort of tried to quantify the savings to taxpayers of all of these various pension reform items. And we held a press conference and talked about them there. And I think at that time we had it at 5.5 billion in savings. And when sharpening the pencil a bit, it comes out to actually a little bit more, $6 billion in savings. 1 billion of that 6 billion can be attributed to the benefit changes and the additional employee contributions that are coming into the system. So benefit changes, again, mostly COLA adjustments, but then on the contribution increases, those are now fully implemented, and basically there's just more money to be invested into the system, meaning that we're going to get more investment returns over time. And as a result, the state won't have to contribute an additional $1 billion over the next until 2038. The $5 billion is the accelerated one-time payments that are going into the pension system, and then the pre-funding of OPEB. So the accelerated payments are the one-time 200 million that was put in 2022. And then also this ADEC plus payment of $15 million into both systems that will continue until the systems are 90% funded. So just a little bit further breakdown of that. The $1 billion you see here, 580 from employee contributions. So everybody that's in the system paying a little bit more. 400 million from these benefit changes that we talked about, primarily to how COLAs are set. So it's important to mention, I think, these two, because these are things that did impact people that are in the system, and they agreed, as part of the collective broad agreement, to have more paid in on their behalf, more out of their paycheck paid into the system than they had agreed to, and to have their benefits trimmed, although slightly, were impacted and were trimmed as part of this overall pension package. On next slide, you'll see the OPEB benefit of the pre-funding, 4.3 billion. And again, this is savings through 2048, so a little bit longer timeline. We mentioned where those funded ratios are. We're in the really early stages of this pre-funded program, but it's really important, as again, Senator pointed out, that we have this in a trajectory to be paid down. If we'd only addressed the pension side, this would have still been billions of dollars of unfunded liability that had no sort of track to be eliminated. And then here I mentioned that we're able to start putting that money to work. So fiscal year 24, about $32 million earned in the market. So there's an example of concrete savings that we've just seen in the last couple of years, but overall expected to see $4.3 billion in savings, monies that otherwise would have had to come from taxpayers over that time period. And then lastly, just these accelerated payments, $0.7 billion, $700 million. This is the one-time contribution that was made when the pension reform package was put into place. And then also the $15 million a year that's going into both the teachers and state system until those systems are 90% funded. So one good thing here, you all are working on the fiscal year 2026 budget. Fiscal year 33 is when the state is expected to be at 90% funded. So still in the future, but not all that many years down the road. And then teachers expected to be 90% funded in fiscal year 35.
But luckily we had 200 million to put in
Yeah.
22.
Yeah, it was a unique period of time that I think came up with that compromise, because everybody, the state certainly agreed to do a lot more than it had been doing, both in that one-time amount, but also the ongoing $15 million and contributing to that pre-funding of OPEB. And then, of course, the employees agreed to put money in as well that wasn't coming in, and benefit reduction that otherwise wouldn't have happened. But I think it was that combination of, resulted in that unanimous recommendation from the task force and the legislature moving forward.
And the task force had members from the employees unions, teachers unions, all different parties were.
Yeah, all the stakeholders. Yeah, exactly right. So again, this is a summary here of the $6 billion here in the bottom corner. You can see it by different system. You can see it by the specific category and see what that sort of represents. But a good breakdown of just sort of the last few slides. And then just a few takeaways at the end here. This was the message of the press conference, was that the reforms are working and it's important to stay the course, that we're continuing to move in the right direction. Rating agencies, which we'll talk about in a minute, are taking note. It was a hard compromise to get unanimous approval from that task force, which had all those different stakeholders on it. And it is a long-term commitment that we're making or have made already. And, we're building on the work of certain past treasurers and past legislators to sort of the point that we're at now and the commitment that we've made to go forward. But just a note on those rating agency remarks, we have regular meetings with them at least once a year, if not more frequently. And these are the words that they've said in their report, but in our conversations, they've maybe been even more direct about the benefits as they see from the system that we have in place to pay down the unfunded benefits. But certainly each of the rating agencies have recognized the work that's being done and agree that it's put us on a more sustainable path. And when the rating agencies look at Vermont, the two things that they point out to us as negatives are our unfunded liabilities and our demographics. Those are the two things they often talk about. So they have recognized that we've made progress in the unfunded liability and want us to stay the course as well.
And Treasurer, do you know how we measure up to other states?
Yeah.
Funded liability?
So we're not the worst,
Good.
but we're not sort of in the top 50% either. So we have some work to do, and that's why the rating agencies care about that amount so much, is because we are a little bit, out of step in terms of some other states.
Okay.
Then the last thing we wanted to touch on, this was part of the Act 114 as well. There was an amendment where there was a waterfall to direct funds that otherwise would have been reserved in the general fund balance to 50% to the sort of the rainy day fund or the budget reserves, 25% to the state pension fund, and then 25% to this thing called the teacher's post-retirement adjustment allowance account. That account is only funded through this waterfall mechanism, and those that were here in 2022 may remember that there's a provision in the Act 114 that says that 80% funded, the intent is for the legislature to provide a full COLA benefit to teachers, but it's contingent on it getting to 80% funded, and it's contingent on there being enough money in this PAAA fund for that to go into effect. So this PAAA fund was created to keep it off of the actuarial books, if you will, so the impact wouldn't be felt actuarially. It was sort of put off to the side. The intent was to provide that benefit, but only if there was enough money to be able to do so.
All right.
So that had been funded in 2024 to the tune of about $9 million. There is in the BAA and in the budget some notwithstanding language that would seem to preclude there being the possibility of a waterfall. So the possibility of this PAAA being funded at all. And we just want to put that on your radar because we are having conversations with the administration about ways to sort of maneuver that so that is not a complete prohibition for the upcoming.
Because they kind of basically are creating a pre-waterfall.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's just something.
Dam diverting the water to the waterfall.
But it's just something to be mindful of because that is, both of those points, the 25% to teacher to state, but more importantly, that 25% to teachers, that's sort of the only funding mechanism that exists for that.
Did we have one year, my first year on this committee, where there was some confusion around how that COLA benefit was, because there was a percentage of two different things, but we fixed that.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay, won't bring it up. Okay.
So I think that's sort of everything, at least I wanted to address, but happy to answer any questions that folks might have as well.
Yeah, Senator Norris.
Treasurer Pichak, just a quick question because I don't know. What are we looking at for numbers here? Those individuals, those retirees that are under the state retirement and those that may be under the teacher's retirement system?
How many people are in it?
Yeah.
Boy, it's about like 10, I mean, this is a rough number, but about 10,000 each.
If we're talking all-in members, which would include active members, deferred members, and retirees, states around 20,000, the teachers around 25,000, I think the municipals around 20,000, thereabouts. We did a presentation to the Joint Pension Oversight Committee in November. We can share that. It has sort of a snapshot that includes membership and details like that.
That'd be great, thank you.
The Act 114 savings report that's on our website, is that a new report or is this the report?
Yes,
the report you're talking about? No, it's a different.
No,
the one that Tim's talking about, I think is for pension oversight, which would have been back in December.
yeah,
This one doesn't have to, oh no, February 25, so you just issued.
The one that we issued that you have is the quantifying the $6 billion in savings.
Okay.
The one that Tim is talking about sort of breaks down the actives and the retirees. But of the 20,000 or so and the 25,000 or so, there's maybe 10,000 people, maybe 12,000 in the other system that are actively getting a benefit from the system.
The other ones are still paying.
The others are still paying, or they're not working and not yet owed a benefit. And we didn't talk about the municipal system at all today because they weren't part of the pension reform discussion.
You oversee that? Or-
Yeah, we administer it. And at the end of the day, the state is not the backstop for those systems. It's the municipal governments that pay into them. So that's why it doesn't rise to the same level of concern, as the state and teachers. The rating agencies don't, aren't as concerned about it for us.
They would rate them. The municipalities would get their own rating for their municipal bonds.
Yeah, they have, through the bond bank is usually how they issue debt. And there is the state does have a moral obligation on some of that debt, but it's not as direct as it is here with the unfunded liability.
And are they well funded or?
So they're in like the 70% range. They were pretty well funded when these pension reform discussions were going on. They come down a little bit in the last couple of years. That's why we sort of acted quickly to put in place, basically the same concept here where employers and employees will contribute a little bit more every year. We had a 4-year plan that was set to retire, I think, next year. And we've agreed at the end of last legislative session, all the stakeholders agreed to basically have another 4 years where we'll slowly ratchet up what the employee, is paying, or I guess it's both employee and employer equally. There's further conversation that can be had on that point, but so that will start to move it again into more solid footing. So we do pay attention to that. We want to pay close attention. We don't want the municipalities to get in a position where things are a challenge for them.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I thought it was important for the committee to know the history that went into these, because we see some pretty big budget numbers going into
Yeah,
these,
sure.
so it's important for people to know why we're doing that and how it's been successful so far, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, even though it's still a long tunnel. Yeah, Senator Bridge.
Can I switch
Oh,
gears?
yeah.
So we had a little bit of discussion earlier with Representative Shaw about the 14 million that they've put into their budget adjustments. But my interest was in the remaining 6 million. I understand that 1 million of that, there had been talk about that going to Senator Lyons' medical buy down. Wondering about the remaining 5 million and what your office's position would be on reverting that to the general fund.
Yeah, so we'd certainly be open to it. For the whole entire 20 million, that was appropriated, let's say 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And, we've analyzed a couple of different times whether we could, whether it made sense to sort of buy down more bonds than what we were able to refinance. And both times that we've gone out to the market, we've said no, that we should hold on to this money because we're earning quite a bit in cash. So, that would continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. So as a general matter for the entire 20 million, we're open to different, more immediate, impactful, policy initiatives by the legislature. So that's sort of our broad position.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Are you going to propose something for the FY26 budget about that 5 million, or not in the BAA?
Yeah, one thing I should mention is, so we started, there's the full 20 million, and then there was 14 million that was borrowed for some immediate flood recovery.
Got paid back.
And then it got paid back, although we had a position that if the administration wanted to use that for other purposes, we'd be open to it, because we don't think we're gonna, use it in the immediate term. So the only amount that we knew was coming back was gonna be, there was the 6 million. I guess there was a universe where that 14 million would never come back, I guess.
Right.
So for the 6 million, we thought, well, what are some things that could be impactful with that? And medical debt was one thing that we identified. And then we had a report that we submitted. We're looking at climate infrastructure. So there was, I think, about 3 million for this program called Safeguarding Tomorrow, which allows a 10-to-1 federal match. So we just, that has a big sort of impact in terms of the ratio. Then there was a municipal technical assistance program that the governor had created, and I think there was about 2 million of projects that weren't able to be funded previously with that money. So those were things that we suggested in that report, but like with any of our suggestions, it's up to the legislature to decide what to do with the money.
And, you know, I appreciate that. I'm reminded by Senator Kitchell showing up. She was always very much about everything being judged equally at the table and not pre-funding things or pre-deciding things. So, you know, my own thought would be that those monies should come back to the Appropriations Committee. And then if a proposal comes forward from your office or the administration, we can judge it equitably against other possibilities. But for instance, we've been talking for 4 years now, 5 years, about the GA program. It looks as though that may need more money. To me, that's one or two most pressing need. So if that money could come back in the BAA, we could begin to think about that for the budget.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your
Yeah,
willingness.
so that makes sense. You know, both the things that you said make sense to compare
Yeah.
things sort of against each other. And the same rationale applies to that 5 million, that it will remain there unless the legislature actively does something with it, because we don't plan to use it to buy down the bonds in the future.
Or what report was, I remember, but it wasn't in Ashland's handout, but I do remember those two items being mentioned, but you said it was in the report, what report?
Yeah, there's a climate finance report that we submitted, I think it was like November 15th.
Okay.
And
That you submitted to the whole legislature.
yeah,
Part
exactly
of that
right.
language we had in the bill the year before, right?
So those are two programs that we had identified as ones that the state, you know, may want to, we haven't participated in the Safeguarding Tomorrow money. That would be resiliency related money. And then obviously the municipal technical assistance fund already exists. But the thought with both of those was, with the Safeguarding Tomorrow, you know, you're putting up 3 million, but you're potentially getting 30 million from the federal government. So, you know, pretty big impacts, kind of like medical debt, 1 million to pay down 100 million. And then the other one is municipal assistance. You know, the thought there is if you provide more resources to municipal leaders and government officials, that they might be able to pull down even more federal funds. Now, all of those assumptions in light of the current federal, yeah.
So we have a report called Report on Credit Facilities for Local Investments. Is that the one, or is there a separate one just on that?
There's everyone just on that.
Okay.
I'll make sure we.
It's not on the appropriations website, but maybe it's somewhere else.
I'll make sure.
And I remember seeing it, but I just was gonna try to find it.
Yeah, we can make sure we get a copy to the committee.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the treasurer? Okay, great, well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Mr. Duggan, for coming over. Stakeholders of the pensions in the room.
Oh, yeah.
Keep your eye on the ball.
I should have known you'd read.
Always one step behind.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, that sounds good. I look forward to
I will have a question for you then
that. Sounds good.
about that.
Okay, Grady, you ready?
Sure thing.
You ready?
Nice.
Thank you.
Whenever I see a brown suit, though, I think of Ronald Reagan.
I think of Obama.
Yeah, that scandal.
Yeah, what did they call it? Tangate?
I don't know.
I don't remember the,
Probably the worst thing any president's ever done.
He wore a tan suit and Fox News went nuts and like, oh, this is disrespectful of the presidency.
oh, it was too casual.
But it was a really sharp.
We would
just
never,
Obama.
Oh, right, yeah, that was ridiculous for him.
Don't forget the time he forgot to salute a Marine
oh,
too,
yeah,
you know?
yes, at the
Yeah.
end of it.
Oh,
Thank you. Well, we will not accuse you of not being respectful of the committee.
So what I just passed out is just internal working document for the committee, just for reference as you're working through the BAA markup. So this was just what you see there is in track changes. So it doesn't capture everything that the House did, but it's a useful document.
Can you just decode what the red is?
Yes, so what you see in red is house changes, but this doesn't capture all house changes because obviously late in the game there are fixes and edits. So for instance, I wrote plus GA, so that isn't captured in this document here, that there was the additional amount of money for the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program.
Very little language, but it's just focusing on the language, not
Yes.
the dollar.
Correct. In this section 50, the House removed the $4 million governor recommendation for $4 million general fund for contingent sustainability grants to mental health. They did not take that out. It was the administration's recommendation that appropriation be bumped up to 10 million and be directed to DEVA. So you'll see that reflected in section 50 of the House bill.
So there's no way when we look at this to know what the House and the governor did, or did you just explain that now?
I think the red is the House and everything else is the governor.
Correct.
Okay. Any other track changes would be the governor.
Correct. So anything you see in this document is red. So it's just for the committee to be able to quickly delineate between gov-rec language and House language changes.
So for like example number 11 that's struck is red and struck out. So that for me would mean the House added it and struck it out.
No, so the House struck it out. It turns it red when they struck it out. So the House removed that $4 million appropriation, but because the administration flagged that it should be a $10 million appropriation to DEVA, so you'll see an appropriation for similar purpose later in House Section 50, which is amending Section B1100 of Act.
This is the
Got it.
Provider sustainability grants.
exactly. Thank you, Bruce. Okay.
Okay. And is there language associated with how that's used?
Yes.
Yeah,
So you'll see a section later on outside of this that's related to it as well. So you'll see in section 50, the House removed that 4 million and then added in sub O a sub 4 10 million general fund for provider stabilization grants. That should be on page 3 of the document that you're looking at. The House also added in an $11 million general fund appropriation for an alternative payment model reconciliation payment to Brattleboro Retreat. This $11 million appropriation was in the governor's recommended FY26 budget and was pulled in by the House for the BAA. So it was recommended in the governor as a C section of the big bill, which affects the current fiscal year. The House decided to move it into the BAA.
Was there a explanation about why?
I believe that this payment is.
Why the payment or why the move?
Why the move?
Well, can I ask, this is one-time money,
Yes.
and it was one time next year and or one time this year, and we owe the money, so I'm not really sure what the details are around that, but it's one-time money, whether you do it either one.
Yeah, my understanding is they just thought it made more sense if we're gonna spend it now and put it in the BAA, because it was gonna be in the FY6 budget, but for FY25.
Correct. It's a required payment for
Yeah,
FY25, so the House
we owe the
moved it
money.
in. Then the House also removed the $14 million recommended appropriation to the Treasurer's Office that you just heard about. So then the House split up those funds in a couple different areas. As mentioned, they increased the funding by about $1.8 million for the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program. They directed. So yes, that language is in the as passed bill, but in this working document, it wasn't added yet. So this version of the language is not the finalized version. It's not what the House Appropriations Committee ended up passing. It captures most, but not all changes. The House added in an $8.6 million general fund appropriation to VHCB. They took the same language that was in Act 113 for funds to VHCB. So this provides support and enhances capacity for the production and preservation of affordable mixed income rental housing and home ownership units, improvements to manufactured homes and communities, permanent homes and emergency shelter for those experiencing homelessness,
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm wondering, so I read this language to say that it could be used to fund any of these things?
Yes.
In no particular order, and I'm wondering if that's something we could talk about with them.
Yeah, I wanted to have the HCB come in and talk about this.
Yeah, because some of those things seem to me clearly more important.
Yeah.
Not that they're all not important, but there might be an order established.
Yeah.
And also, this is 8.6 additional, and what do they currently have that could be used similarly?
And then you'll see that the House also added in 2.8 million general fund to complete pilot projects identified pursuant to 2022 Action Resolves number 186. So these are pilot projects that were supposed to be identified by Dale. In particular, this is for developmentally disabled housing in connection to, I believe, the Champlain Housing Trust. So this is money being directed to VHCB for those specific pilot projects.
And VHCB is coming in on Friday.
Didn't we hear that those are projects that are already in the pipeline, already being built, and this just completes them? Is that what we heard?
Yeah, I heard that there were two and this was gonna complete the third.
Right.
Yeah, they're finishing one or two of the ones, and then they're gonna be able to add another one.
I would just say in relationship to what, Senator Bruce said, if we're almost there, let's get over the finish line.
Exactly.
Section 51, the House changed the allocation of the property transfer tax to align with legislative intent. So you'll see that in on page 6, you'll see those number changes there. That doesn't change the total allocation, so you'll see that the $9 million figure is still there. It's just how those funds are directed. And this relates to Act 181, so you'll see language later on in the BAA that relates to disaggregating the property transfer tax from Act 181, so it all lives in the budget.
And these are just updated based on actual.
So the total dollar amount, that 9 million, doesn't change from the Gov Rec. This is just aligning that allocation with legislative intent. So there were changes to that allocation in the statute that the administration, the numbers that they suggested didn't align with legislative intent. But there was an express in the letter of legislative intent related to Act 113 to fix this allocation in the BAA. So that's what the House did here. In section 52, the House in sub 1 sub O pulled in that transfer from the general fund to the state liability self-insurance fund. This was in the governor's FY26 C section. The House pulled it in here. And then you'll also see there are a number of instances in this marked up copy where it looks like the House is adding in a lot of language, but that's just background for drafting purposes. So the governor recommended in sub 2, for instance, didn't correct the lettering for those subdivisions. So the House added in language to correct the lettering, but made no substantive change to that section. So there's multiple lines on that page 7. The only change there is just making sure that those subdivisions are properly labeled.
And the 3 million for the state liability self-insurance fund, is that different than that debt capitalization for the self-insurance fund?
I believe so, yes.
Different thing. Okay. So the addition to the self-insurance fund is just like a regular payment that we would make to that fund to help pay it last year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was in the 26 gov rec, and it probably would be good to have the Secretary of Administration.
So we talked about the other self-insurance, like the debt they had in that capitalization debt. It's the same fund, but this is a different dollar amount for that.
This is a different fund. That was the medical insurance fund, the 18.5 million, that's just a cartel.
Okay, this is state liability, nothing to do with it. Just,
Yeah.
we just add money to it every once in a while to increase our fund.
Yes, and this one there is, again, we have the Secretary of Administration, we'll talk about it next year. Emily Byrne, the fiscal office, watching, we had to make some payments related to an E5 settlement last year.
Oh, right, I
out of
think
the
he did
state
talk about it.
liability insurance fund, and this, those payments need to be general fund, not other funds. The liability insurance fund kind of is a pool of all departments and agencies get billed and all those funds come in, but the payment that goes out related to the EB5 case has to be general fund, so we have to transfer general fund in so that it can make that payment.
Okay, now I remember, okay, thank you.
Section 53, so you'll see that it looks like the legislature struck reversions, or that the House struck reversions. Those reversions already exist in Act 113. So again, this is an instance where they just don't need to appear in the budget adjustment. No changes were being made. So those strikeouts aren't actually canceling any GovRec reversions. They're just not included in the bill because they don't need to be. In this section, you'll see the addition of a reversion. So the VHFA AOA, $3 million.
These are all reversions, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And that VHFA reversion, do we know what program that was from? I remember talking about this with you.
I don't know offhand. I would have to get back to you.
We'll figure it out later. Okay.
The next change is in section 55, page 15. So you'll see that the House added requested Attorney General position and one court diversion assistant director. This was not in the GovRec. The Office of the Attorney General did not request any additional funds for this position in FY25. I believe that will be an FY26 request if there is one. This was a House addition, simply adding the position so that the Attorney General's office can start work on that recruitment process.
And then we have that other request from the AG for the position in the Solicitor General's office. So we were gonna be talking about that. So it would be added to the same section.
In addition to what's here?
Yeah, this was for the, I forgot what the word was, pre-trial.
Yeah, pre-trial diversion.
And the new position would be in the Solicitor General dealing with federal litigation.
On page 20, you'll see that the House struck, the governor recommends section 59. This related to interpretation of legislative intent that an appropriation made for emergency Medicaid services. So this was payments. So if EMS arrived and did not transport, that they would still be able to access funds. There was an interpretation that this was one-time funding, so a section was included to reflect that. The Joint Fiscal Office conversed with the administration, clarified that the legislative intent was for that funding to be ongoing, so this section was struck by the House.
Okay. Next one.
So the next change is on page 27 to section 66. So a couple things happened here relating to the GovRec FY26 budget, pulling in C sections and E sections. The first you'll see is expanding the allowable uses of appropriation that was made to offset cost of denied claims for FEMA. This language was changed in the GovRec FY26 to allow for those funds to be used for unanticipated statewide costs related to recovery efforts from declared disasters or administering programs created by funds from ARPA.
Wait, what page?
I thought you said page 27,
I
yeah.
was on 27, the
Sorry.
Northeast Kingdom Choice School District.
So section 66 starts at the very bottom, but
Oh,
the
got
language
it.
is on page
Oh,
28.
okay, yeah.
Apologies.
Yeah, you didn't mention those two changes from
Yeah,
those school districts in the kingdom that had that change.
Right, so that
There were a couple of those.
the House change there was just to correct for drafting. So the new language should come after the struck out language. So they just took the new language and added it to the end of the section. So on page 28, you'll see the section 66 language, taking in that GovRec FY26 change. This was a C section in the GovRec FY26 to expand the uses of that prior appropriation related to disaster assistance. And then multiple changes, changing the hub and spoke pilot program from a 2-year pilot to a 3-year pilot. This is no funding change. This is just related to startup delay. So extending the pilot of that so that they can continue to use those funds for that program. And those sections you'll see in the GovRec FY26, those changes were recommended in 1 or 2 C sections and then a couple of E sections. So the House plans to pull those sections out of the FY26 budget when it comes to the Senate. On the bottom of page 31 and then continuing on to pages 32 and 32 through 36. This is GovRec recommended language repealing the Workforce Education and Training Fund, which is a defunct fund. The House change here is still supporting that intent. It's just the language doesn't need to reflect that all of that language is being struck. So they've changed it to that one line rather than having it have all of that statutory language.
Get rid of some pages.
Save some trees.
Our bill won't look as impressive.
We don't care about precedent. We
You
just
know,
want our
we-
way.
Efficient.
On
We just want our way. We don't care about precedent.
On page 40, the House struck Gov recommend section 73. This was relating to providing increased authority or expanding authority for the emergency board in response to a declared emergency, replenish the spending authority of state agencies and departments. The House believed that this should be a discussion for FY26, and so removed it from the BAA, believing that it wasn't time sensitive and that this conversation could have more time to continue.
Did we talk about that one? I don't remember talking about it. Who would we have, other than we would have either the secretary or the JFO be able to explain that? We'd have finance and management.
On page 45, this is again another instance of the House just taking out that repeal language because it's not necessary. They made no substantive change to the GovRec. They just simplified the drafting there.
That was 77?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
On page 46, section 78. So this expands the DHFA rental housing revolving loan program. This was requested language. In sub B on page 47, you'll see that the annual increase is limited to, or shall not exceed 3%. This gives the agency increased discretion to determine that. So it adds in that underlined or an amount otherwise authorized by the agency. Section 79 is House added language relating to the Human Services Caseload Reserve.
So sorry, I'm just catching up. So that what the existing statute said does not exceed 3%. They added or an amount otherwise authorized by the agency, being which agency in this part of
The Vermont Housing Finance Agency.
So VHFA could just say, oh, because of market conditions for that unit or in general, we're gonna okay at 4%. Okay, thank you, sorry.
No cap.
No, so that language as it exists gives the agency discretion to determine that.
And that's in perpetuity, right?
That would be, this is a change to the program statute, yes. Section 79, relating to the Human Services Caseload Reserve. So this is House added language. In sub C, you'll see this directs the Secretary of Administration to unreserve and transfer funds from the Human Services Caseload Reserve to the Child Care Contribution Special Fund as necessary to maintain a balance that appropriately supports the state's statutory obligations to CCFAP. So this is language to ensure that such a transfer could be made in the instance of a program deficit in CCFAP.
So this is what Representative Shai was talking about. Yes, Senator West.
So under the present scenario, could the Human Services Caseload Reserve be used in its present form to support child care and CCFAP?
I mean, not without this language.
Well, this transfers it and makes the pre-decision in this. My question for this is, would we better just say for the Human Services Caseload Reserve that it's permissible to use it in CCFAP to not predetermine that one or the other is more important? Because if the only time we would use that is when we're in trouble. And I would much rather see us have a broader Human Services Caseload Reserve to allow them to use it for this or a Medicaid shortfall and not predetermine where it's gonna go. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense. Is the caseload reserve calculated by just an estimate, or is it like a 5% of last year? Or
No.
they just try to guess what the
No,
who
but
makes
when
the
we have surplus, we tuck it in there.
Is that the only?
Sometimes, and there's specific language, I don't know if it's in here, that sort of drives the calculation to the Human Services Caseload Reserve. No, it's not. But it's like, it has to do with, it's currently funded with a combination of things related to, like the tail on Medicaid, right? So if Medicaid were to, and there would be claims tail that need to be paid out. And so it's sort of like, I can look at it in more detail, but this it gets money gets transferred in and out based on sort of like what Medicaid looks like on a year end basis. And then if this would allow, like, if and only if there was a deficit in the child care special fund, finance and management can use this reserve to bring it back to zero.
And my question
if needed.
is, would we just,
No, go ahead. I'll
my
ask it.
question really is not predisposing anything, but if we ran into trouble and we have a deficit, should we not leave ourselves flexibility to maybe use it on the caseload reserve, maybe use it on Medicaid, but give us the flexibility to use this? This moves it to childcare and says, we've already made the decision and we boxed ourselves in and not given ourselves freedom when that comes. And I'm totally supportive of saying to CCFAP that if you're in trouble, you're an eligible use.
But then have somebody have the authority to move.
Well,
Somebody would have to move it over.
we would have the authority, they'd have to come to the legislature to use the caseload reserve because we have to appropriate.
What if it was out of session? Could that happen? We were not in session and they run aground?
So, and I think this would only occur in June, right? Like, so if we got to the end of the fiscal year.
Yep.
And it looked like there was gonna be a deficit in that fund. This would give the Secretary of Admin the ability to keep it out of deficit going into the next fiscal year.
Would it give the opportunity or just require it?
It's directive language.
So shall,
Yes.
shall move it over. So they'd make an estimate for next year and say, okay, there's not enough money in there, so we shall move it from the case flow.
Or not even next year, like they get to June 30, expenses are more than anticipated or revenue is under what was anticipated, then the net puts them in the red. Then the Secretary of Admin moves money over to get them out of the red to close the books, basically. It doesn't sort of move any money, like they would wait until book closing time to true it up. It doesn't.
Well, that's a little different than,
That's not permanent.
Do we want to have one other thing I thought, which I thought was going to be similar, but maybe not to what Senator Westman was saying, like, do we want to include this potential obligation on the caseload reserves in our calculation of how much should be in the caseload reserves? Because right now it's not, but this could draw on caseload reserves.
Right, I think what's challenging with the child care contribution special fund is that it hasn't even been in existence for one full fiscal year yet, and the program hasn't really matured or sort of, and so this is a sort of like, we don't know what's gonna happen, we don't know what'll happen in June. This is the sort of stopgap to make sure that if things don't perform or there's excess draw on the fund, that it doesn't end up in the red, and that, we can revisit it, as there's more information available, determine whether or not a reserve is appropriate in that fund specifically, and and this mechanism in the future is or isn't appropriate, and so just more information about what to do, but then, we've only got 4 months or so, 5 months of payroll tax receipts, and the full child care program has only been in effect since October, so
And that's the
we just don't have
objection.
any experience.
And that's the objection to setting up a reserve fund, because we don't have enough experience to create yet another 7,000 special fund. So we'd rather do it, this makes it easier.
Yeah, this makes sure that the fund doesn't go into deficit while also buying time to understand sort of what's going on with the revenue and the expenses, because they're both new.
well, what does this do to Medicaid? Does this prioritize everything else over Medicaid?
I don't think so.
I just want us to have flexibility to be able to look at all of it and say, what's the best thing to do if we're in a tight spot?
We can look at it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk more about that, flag that one. Okay, Grady?
At the bottom of page 48, you'll see section 80, house added language. This is related to what you all were just discussing. This is intent language that any unreserved and unallocated balance in the child care contribution special fund shall remain in the fund to support the future establishment of a reserve for it. So this again is related to the lack of experience for the payroll tax so far, and take up and utilization. So this is intent language that any money in that fund that's not used stays in that fund until a determination can be made about a reserve amount and the necessity of a reserve for the fund itself.
Okay.
Section 81.
Wait, I'm sorry, did you have a question, Senator Lyon?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks, go ahead.
On page 49. So this is required report language for the Department of Corrections in collaboration and consultation with the Department of Labor related to deficits in corrections facility work programs and the efficacy of those programs related to outcomes for incarcerated individuals. So the language directs the Department of Corrections to notify the General Assembly if programs are running in a deficit and also submit a report on program outcomes. This was House added language and requested by or developed in collaboration with the Committee on Corrections and Institutions.
And does the governor recommend had language about Department of Corrections for programs? Did they keep all that language? Or the money that they moved around?
Yes, so this is new language. There wasn't direct language on that specifically.
That was just dollars
Yes.
moved around, okay.
On page 51, section 82. So this relates to that $10 million appropriation for provider stabilization grants. So this is language saying that all Vermont Medicaid participating providers with demonstrated stabilization needs and a sustainability plan shall be eligible for those funds being made in section B1100 of Act 113, which that appropriation is being added in section 50 of the BAA as it exists currently. And it states that those participating providers include substance use residential treatment facilities, federally qualified health centers, residential mental health care providers, and other providers of healthcare and human services. So this is just eligibility language related to that appropriation. Section 83. So this is language that the House added relating to the adult diploma program and high school completion program. So last legislative session, changes were made to adult ed programs in statute. Result of that was that the high school completion program was removed from statute and replaced with the adult diploma program. This led to a situation where a certain number of students who qualified for a diploma through that program, now the program doesn't exist and they can't get a diploma. So this is language to ensure that they're able to get the diploma that they have earned.
I'm going back to 62, just real briefly.
62 or 82?
I mean 82.
I'm like, wow, you're gonna wait.
Oh, I'm not going. No, just the list is there. Obviously, we know there are significant needs out there. Is there any indication of what the eligibility requirements will be when applications are made?
So
This is,
any Vermont Medicaid participating provider with demonstrated stabilization needs and a sustainability
but there's
plan.
nothing there that defines stabilization needs.
No, there's no language on that.
Okay.
But when it says,
And it also has any other providers of healthcare and human services.
Correct. So it specifically delineates a number of particular provider types, but it
Nothing by
leaves open.
size or
Right, it leaves it open for,
geographic region.
correct.
what is the appropriate pursuit into the B100 section of last year's big bill? What is that?
So that's the $10 million that they add in section 50. So they add the $10 million in section 50 of the BAA. And then this language says, this language provides the eligibility guidelines that the House added.
But this says section B 100.04 of the 2024 action result. 113.
Yes, so, section 50 is amending Act 113. So new appropriations in the Budget Adjustment Act are added in Act 113.
I get it.
So when there's a reference to it, it doesn't reference section 50, but it references section B 1100 of the big bill.
Okay. And that's, I would say, maybe a question for your committee, Senator Lyons, if your committee wants to recommend different
Okay.
language, it would be helpful to hear.
It's, this is difficult because there are many different organizations that would fall into a need for stabilization.
Right. Do we want to provide more language around
I
that?
don't
or
know.
trust
I don't know if it's, I don't know, think about it.
You're in charge.
You want to say you're going into chapter 11, therefore you're eligible, or do you want to say that you're on the downturn, or you've been in the red for X number of years, or?
I think,
It's just like,
I think you want to stay away from saying
I-
anything that would tip anybody's hand, that somebody might be looking at chapter 11.
exactly.
I think in the nursing homes, I would say that the agency has done a pretty good job
Right.
With that process.
with that process, and that, I think your committee looking at it and having the agency in would be good.
We'll see what the timing is like, yeah.
Jim?
Because you don't want people to tip their hand if they're in trouble.
Okay, next section.
On page 52, section 84, this is House added language relating to discretionary exemptions for SNAP. So this is directing DCF to fully utilize the state's allocation of discretionary exemptions in SNAP to the extent permitted by federal regulation. So this is directing DCF to maximize that usage.
Seems like a no-brainer.
Section 85, so this is removing the repeal of change to marriage license fees. So there was a temporary increase that was set to be sunset. Funds from marriage license fees are in part directed to the Crime Victims Special Fund, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, and then those funds are then directed to the Center for Crime Victim Services. Without this language, that change to that license fee would revert, and the fee would go back to, I believe, $60 rather than the current $80. So this ensures that the current level of funding that's ultimately directed to the Center for Crime Victim Services is maintained.
Okay.
Section 86, so in the budget, this is budget neutral change. So a reversion was removed from the GovRec, and then funds from that are being used here, $800,000 to upgrade network wiring in security systems in county courthouses. So the House removed a reversion and then expanded the allowable use of that appropriation. And so you'll see here, they didn't remove any money from the total appropriation here. They just have it knocking down that 5.7 million and then delineating out that 870,000 of that is for that network wiring upgrade.
There wasn't it 850? Is that what's represented?
50,000 is for a separate purpose.
For a bathroom.
Okay.
ADA accessible bathrooms
Oh,
at the
I
Essex
remember
Meeting House.
Seeing that language, okay.
Section 87. So this is again just modifying the allowable use of a prior appropriation. In this instance, not all the funds appropriated for the replacement of State House cafeteria furnishings. So the new chairs was used. The Sergeant at Arms would like to be able to use some of those funds to purchase and install an X-ray machine in the State House. So this just changes the allowable use of that prior year appropriation.
Was it Agatha that testified? No, or was it?
Either Agatha or Scott Moore, I'm not sure.
Well, we want to have, I guess you can ask Agatha to come in and talk about that. I'd rather have a new table when we're in the lab, an X-ray.
So
We can have a debate about it. Yeah.
my question, why is this in a budget adjustment and not next year's budget?
Maybe they want to buy the X-ray machine for tomorrow.
I'd like to hear about that.
I asked that seriously
Yeah.
because frankly, this is probably not going to be done before the end of the session. And so they probably aren't going to have an X-ray machine until at least next January anyways.
Because right now, there's no place to put it. There's not that this is-
Where do you put
Well,
it?
I think it's part of the renovation there. We're gonna talk about having an extra space for an X-ray machine when they do a new single point of entry in the back there. Senator Brennan, you have a question?
No, that was my question. You have 3 points of entry, one machine here, and that's
Yeah.
a whole another
We
discussion.
can have
Well,
Agatha.
that's partly why I asked the question. If it was in if this is an issue, I'm not saying this is not a good, but next year, I don't see how we're gonna have a machine before, the end of June.
And I don't see where it's needed yet, where it's like buying the tires for a car you haven't bought yet.
Right,
You know, I mean,
I think we've got,
Emily,
Sure, so, I think JLMC authorized the sergeant at arms to purchase the X-ray machine in the fall. They asked that this language get incorporated into the Budget Adjustment Act to authorize the use of the capital bill funds.
so they already bought it.
Yes, and I think it would be good to have, the sergeant at arms come in to talk about that, or the, chief of the Capitol Police. It's sort of it's over by the entry by, by the pink lady, by the coat room. But it was, JLMC authorized it in the language.
Maybe we should have GMLC in to explain their action. The pro tem is down there. We'll ask the pro tem.
But yeah, I think, you could ask them some more detailed questions about it, but
But it's kind of moot.
I believe this was in response to the particularly suspicious appearance of a certain senator from Lamoille, so they need this.
I'm sure, so how much was the machine? And how much of this is furniture?
I think it's a little less than half. It's about 50/50, but again, I think you should have Sergeant at Arms to speak to the details.
Okay.
shares are $500 a piece
Just wondering.
in the
Probably
cafeteria.
only one, there's one.
Those two?
It's already out there.
It's, also because we get DHSA, we want to then.
I know where it is now.
And it costs half of this, so it takes like
I'll tell
200.
you later. Okay, what else you got for us, Grady?
Section 88, so beginning on the bottom of page 53 and then continuing on to page 54. These are house changes to the current General Assistance Emergency Housing Program relating to that increase of the appropriation that appears in section 50, which is amending section B1100 of Act 113. You'll see that they have removed the room cap between April 1st and June 30th, as it was in the original language, and extended emergency winter housing eligibility criteria to June 30th. And that is the final substantive change from the GovRec.
Okay. You did make an exchange in the effective date.
Yes, so the change in the effective dates is just notwithstanding language.
What's one VSA 14?
I believe it prohibits retroactive effective dates, so you must notwithstand it in order to make an effective date not retroactive.
So is that every year?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Any questions about the effective date? The most important part. Okay. Thank you, Grady. That's helpful. So, if people want to go on here, Emily, or do you want to take a break? We've been going for a little bit of time without a break. It's the treasurer took our break that we were gonna, still blaming.
Well,
Are you,
I gotta take a break.
do you have any time? Do you-
I'm free till 3:30, so I want to take a little break.
Okay, we'll take just a quick break.